He wanted to silence the activist, but didn't count on a brave young engineer, a fearless journalist, or the watchful eye of an old bison. In Pine Valley, a trap disguised as an inspection became a symbol of resistance. Welcome to the channel. Before we begin, please like and subscribe so we can keep creating stories like this one. The winter season had begun with full force in the small town of Pine Valley, nestled in the majestic Grand Canyon of Arizona. The town, famous for its impressive panoramic cable car that crossed the valleys and climbed toward the pine-covered mountains, was a coveted refuge for both traditional American families and foreign tourists seeking tranquility. An environment where everything seemed calm until a man arrived with a not-so-peaceful objective. Nathan Morgan was not an ordinary tourist. Heir to a powerful chain of luxury hotels scattered throughout the United States, and with important international connections, he arrived in Pine Valley in his luxurious black Bentley, causing a stir among the locals who rarely saw such ostentatious vehicles traveling their cobblestone streets. His purpose in this remote corner of America was very specific: to get rid of what he considered a persistent obstacle to his business. That obstacle had a first and last name: Ethan Winters, a man in a wheelchair, a dedicated activist who resided in Pine Valley and tirelessly fought to make tourist areas more accessible for people with disabilities. Ethan had filed multiple lawsuits against large hotels, including those in the Morgan chain, for non-compliance with accessibility legislation. From his small office in the main square, he coordinated a movement that was gaining more and more visibility in the national media. The relationship between Nathan and Ethan had never been direct, but the institutional confrontation grew day by day, gaining space in the national press and putting millions in investments at risk. Nathan, accustomed to solving problems with money or under-the-table agreements, saw in that activist a threat that couldn't be bought, only eliminated. While Nathan settled into the presidential suite of the Canyon Lodge, owned by his family and the most luxurious in Pine Valley, Ethan conducted his weekly meeting with the accessibility activist group at the town's cultural center. "Friends, we have good news. The federal court has accepted our class action lawsuit against the Morgan chain. For the first time, a judge has recognized that denying proper access to people with disabilities is a violation of fundamental rights," Ethan announced to a dozen people who listened attentively. Among them was Laura Harrison, a reporter for the local newspaper, the Arizona Herald, and Ethan's personal friend since childhood. Laura took notes eagerly, knowing that this news deserved the front page. At 35, Laura had forged a reputation as an incorruptible journalist, always willing to investigate cases of social injustice. "Ethan, did you know that Nathan Morgan is in town?" Laura asked when the meeting ended and the other attendees began to leave. "The Morgan heir, here in Pine Valley?" "That can't be a coincidence," replied Ethan, adjusting his black-framed glasses that contrasted with his graying hair. "Be careful, friend. That man has a reputation for stopping at nothing to get what he wants," warned Laura. Ethan smiled with determination. "You know corporate bullies don't scare me. I've been fighting too long to back down now." The next day, Nathan Morgan convened a closed-door meeting with the engineering team responsible for maintaining the cable car. Although the cable car concession officially belonged to the municipality, the Morgan Company had held the exclusive contract for its operation and maintenance for a decade. "Gentlemen, I need a complete evaluation of the system. I've been informed that there are deficiencies in the cabin adapted for wheelchairs," said Nathan in an authoritative tone, while staring at Robert Sanders, the chief engineer, a middle-aged man with 20 years of experience who had agreed to several unethical arrangements in the past in exchange for generous compensation. What Nathan didn't know was that among the technicians present was Charlie Martinez, a young engineer recently hired who had graduated with honors from the National Institute of Technology and who listened to the conversation with growing discomfort. Charlie had grown up in a humble family in Pine Valley and had secured that job with much effort. His father, Henry Martinez, was the main caretaker of the American bison that had been introduced years ago in a nearby reserve as part of a conservation and eco-tourism program. These majestic animals, similar to the North American buffalo but adapted to the Arizona climate, had become an additional attraction for visitors. "Mr. Morgan, all our facilities meet safety standards," replied Robert, although his evasive gaze revealed that he perfectly understood what Nathan was insinuating. "I need to speak with you in private after the meeting, Engineer Sanders," concluded Nathan. Meanwhile, at the cultural center located at the top of the mountain, accessible only by the panoramic cable car, Ethan was preparing a photographic exhibition titled America Without Barriers that showed the advances and challenges in accessibility matters in different corners of the country. This center was his favorite place in all of Pine Valley, a space where he could contemplate the immensity of the Grand Canyon from its wide terrace. Ethan had fought for years to make this center completely accessible, and now he used it as an example of what could be achieved when there was political will. That same afternoon, after finishing preparations for the exhibition, Ethan headed toward the cable car station to descend to the town. The sun was beginning to hide behind the mountains, tinting the sky with orange and reddish tones that reflected on the rocky walls of the canyons. It was a spectacle that never ceased to amaze him. At the station, Jack Vega, the cable car operator, and a close friend of Ethan's greeted him effusively. "Ethan, just in time for the last descent of the day, I have news for you. Tomorrow some technicians will come to perform a special review of the adapted cabin. Direct orders from the Morgan Company." Ethan frowned. "Special review? I've never heard of such a thing. Do you know who gave the order?" "Nathan Morgan himself. He's been in town since yesterday. It seemed strange to me, actually, because we just passed the quarterly inspection barely 2 weeks ago," replied Jack while helping Ethan enter the adapted cabin. What neither of them knew was that Charlie Martinez, the young engineer, had overheard the private conversation between Nathan and Robert. A conversation where they had talked about making technical adjustments to the safety mechanism of the adapted cabin, specifically in the anchoring system for wheelchairs. Charlie, horrified at what was clearly a plan to cause an accident, was torn between his loyalty to the company that had given him his first job opportunity and his moral integrity. That night, as the small town of Pine Valley prepared to sleep under a blanket of stars, 3 people remained awake. Nathan Morgan, finalizing the details of his plan, Charlie Martinez, tormented by the ethical dilemma he faced, and Laura Harrison, who had begun to investigate the businessman's unexpected visit. In the nearby reserve, the old bison known as the Patriarch, a majestic specimen that had been part of an animal-assisted therapy program years ago, seemed restless. Henry Martinez, Charlie's father and principal caretaker, observed him with curiosity. That animal had always shown special, almost intuitive behavior, especially with Ethan, who regularly visited the reserve and had developed a unique bond with the imposing animal. The next morning dawned clear, with that dry, cold characteristic of the Arizona mountains. Nathan Morgan was having breakfast on the terrace of his suite, contemplating the imposing views of the Grand Canyon while checking messages on his latest generation phone. Robert Sanders, the chief engineer, had confirmed that everything was prepared for the special inspection scheduled for that afternoon. The idea of transforming the cable car into a perfect trap had emerged during that private meeting. Nathan had discovered, thanks to his informants, that Ethan frequently used the cable car to visit the cultural center at the top of the mountain. The cabin adapted for people with reduced mobility was under his company's direct responsibility. It would be enough with an imperceptible technical deviation, a simple weakening in the support for the wheelchair. If something happened, it would all be treated as a regrettable accident. "Mr. Morgan, you have a call from Ms. Richardson," announced his personal assistant, interrupting his thoughts. Nathan frowned. Emma Richardson was a minority shareholder in the hotel chain, his late father's niece, and the only person on the board of directors who constantly questioned his methods. "Put her on hold," he responded dryly. Meanwhile, in his modest adapted apartment near the main square, Ethan Winters prepared for an important day. The America Without Barriers exhibition would officially open that afternoon, and several national media had confirmed their attendance. For Ethan, each small victory in his fight for accessibility was a step toward a more inclusive America. His phone rang with a notification. It was a message from Laura. "Need to talk to you urgently. Information about Morgan. Coffee in 20 minutes?" Ethan responded affirmatively and headed to the cabin, a small cafe near his apartment, one of the few fully accessible places in the historic center, thanks in part to his own efforts. Laura was already waiting for him with 2 steaming cups of coffee. "Good morning, Justice Warrior," she greeted him with a smile that contrasted with the concern in her eyes. "What did you discover?" asked Ethan, knowing that look well. "Morgan didn't just come to supervise his hotels. I had access to his itinerary thanks to a contact at the hotel. He had a private meeting with the cable car engineers and specifically requested information about the adapted cabin, the one you use." Ethan remained silent, processing the information. It wasn't the first time he had faced resistance from the powerful, but there was something about Nathan Morgan's presence in Pine Valley that caused him unusual concern. "I also found out that he has scheduled a special inspection of the cabin this afternoon, right before your event at the Cultural Center. Jack mentioned it to me yesterday," nodded Ethan. "But I don't understand what Morgan could gain by sabotaging the cable car. It would be too obvious, and the legal consequences would be devastating for his company." "Unless it looks like an accident," Laura murmured. "And you were the only victim." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Charlie Martinez, who had been desperately looking for Ethan. The young engineer, with dark circles under his eyes that showed a sleepless night, nervously approached the table. "Mr. Winters, excuse me for intruding, but I need to talk to you. It's about the cable car inspection scheduled for today." Laura and Ethan exchanged concerned looks. "I'm all ears, Charlie," replied Ethan, indicating that he should take a seat. With a trembling voice, Charlie told them about the conversation he had overheard between Nathan and Robert. He explained how they planned to strategically weaken the wheelchair anchoring system so that it would fail during the journey, specifically at the highest and most dangerous point of the route. "I'm risking my job by telling you this, but I couldn't live with myself if I didn't," concluded Charlie, his hands still trembling around the coffee cup that Laura had offered him. "We need evidence," said Laura, her journalistic mind already working at full speed. "Without concrete evidence, it's your word against that of one of the most powerful men in America." "I have something better than evidence," replied Charlie, taking out his phone. "I recorded part of the conversation. It's not much, but you can clearly hear when Morgan says that he needs Winters to stop being a problem." Ethan remained silent, his face a mask of determination. Finally, he spoke. "We're not going to cancel the exhibition. We're going to go ahead, but with precautions. Laura, I need you to have that recording ready and be prepared to publish it if necessary. Charlie, could you personally check the cabin before I use it?" "I'll do something better," replied Charlie. "My father is the main caretaker of the bison in the reserve. The cable car passes right over one of the lookouts where the patriarch, the oldest and most respected bison, always is. My father says that animal has a special bond with you from that assisted therapy program." "That's true." Ethan smiled for the first time during the conversation. "That old friend and I understand each other well, but I don't see how he can help us now. My father will be at the lookout with direct radio to the station. If he sees anything suspicious, he can immediately alert the operator," explained Charlie. "Plus, I'll place additional emergency sensors that aren't on the official plans. If anything fails, the system will automatically stop." The improvised plan was risky, but none of the three saw another viable option. At noon, while Ethan headed to the Cultural Center to finalize the details of the exhibition using an alternative road route for this, Nathan Morgan personally supervised the adjustments to the adapted cabin. Robert Sanders, with the precision of a surgeon and the morals of a mercenary, subtly manipulated the safety mechanisms. "Remember, it must look like a random failure. Nothing that can be directly traced back to intentional manipulation," insisted Nathan. "I've done this before, Mr. Morgan," replied Robert with a professional coldness that made Nathan momentarily question how many accidents that man had facilitated throughout his career. What neither of them knew was that Charlie had discreetly installed hidden cameras that recorded every movement, every word. In the natural reserve, Henry Martinez observed with curiosity the unusual behavior of the patriarch. The old bison seemed restless, walking back and forth near the lookout that faced directly toward the cable car. Years of experience with animals had taught Henry that bison, especially the older ones, developed an almost supernatural sensitivity to their surroundings. "So what's wrong with you, old friend?" murmured Henry, approaching the imposing animal with respect that, despite its age, maintained the majesty that characterized its species. The bison snorted, its dark eyes fixed in the direction of the cable car. Meanwhile, at the cultural center, Ethan welcomed the first guests to the exhibition. Among them was Emma Richardson, the minority shareholder of the Morgan chain, an elegant woman in her 50s whose presence surprised Ethan. "Mr. Winters, I've followed your work for some time," Emma introduced herself. "I firmly believe that companies have a social responsibility that transcends economic benefits." Ethan shook her hand, intrigued by the presence of a Morgan at his exhibition. "I appreciate your support, Ms. Richardson. I didn't expect to see any member of the Morgan family today." "Not all Morgans share the same vision of business," she replied with an enigmatic smile. "In fact, there are important matters about the company that I'd like to discuss with you in private." Before they could continue their conversation, Laura approached hurriedly. "Ethan, it's time. The media are ready for the initial press conference, and afterward, you'll have to go down for the official ceremony in the square." The plan was simple. Ethan would give a brief press conference at the cultural center, then descend in the cable car for the official ceremony in the town square, where municipal and state authorities awaited him to recognize his work. The cable car had been programmed for a special trip, with Ethan as the only passenger in the adapted cabin, supposedly for safety and protocol reasons. What Nathan Morgan didn't know was that Charlie had alerted the operator, Jack, about the possible manipulations. Jack, Ethan's trusted friend, had promised to be especially attentive during the journey. At 3 in the afternoon, with an exceptionally clear sky that allowed one to appreciate the immensity of the Grand Canyon in all its splendor, Ethan temporarily said goodbye to the exhibition attendees and headed toward the cable car station. Emma Richardson accompanied him to the entrance. "Be careful, Mr. Winters," she murmured, slightly squeezing his hand. "My nephew is a dangerous man when he feels his interests are threatened." Ethan nodded, silently thanking her for confirming his suspicions. At the lower station, Nathan Morgan watched the security monitors with a barely disguised smile. Everything was ready. With everything meticulously articulated, the plan began to execute. On a day of clear sky and controlled movement, Ethan entered alone into the cabin designated for people with reduced mobility. The wheels began to turn, and the cable car slid smoothly over the cables, cutting through the fresh mountain air. At first glance, no one would suspect anything. The cabin advanced slowly, offering Ethan a panoramic view that never ceased to impress him, despite having contemplated it hundreds of times. From that privileged height, the Grand Canyon extended majestically, with its reddish rock formations contrasting with the intense green of the pines and the deep blue of the Arizona sky. Halfway through the journey, the cabin would pass by the lookout where Henry Martinez waited with the patriarch, the old bison that seemed increasingly restless. Inside the cabin, Ethan reviewed his notes for the speech he would give in the square. Despite the warnings, he remained calm. His life had been a constant struggle against adversities, first against the disease that had left him in a wheelchair at 23, and then against a system that marginalized people with disabilities. Nathan Morgan was just one more obstacle in his path. At the base station, Charlie Martinez discreetly monitored the technical parameters of the cabin. He had installed a parallel control system that allowed him to receive alerts if something functioned abnormally. His phone vibrated with a message from Laura. "Everything okay?" "So far, yes, but the cabin hasn't reached the critical point," replied Charlie. According to his calculations, the manipulated mechanism would fail approximately 3/4 of the way through the journey, right at the point where the cable car reached its greatest height over the canyon. An accident there would be devastating. Nathan Morgan, for his part, observed the cabin's ascent from the VIP terrace of the Canyon Lodge with a glass of cognac in hand and a smile of satisfaction. His phone rang. It was Emma Richardson. He hesitated a moment before answering. "Emma, what a surprise. I thought you'd be in New York attending that foundation of yours for—" His tone was condescending. "I'm in Pine Valley, Nathan," she interrupted him coldly. "In fact, I just personally met Mr. Winters, an admirable man." Nathan visibly tensed. "I didn't know you were so interested in social causes as to travel to this lost town." "There are many things you don't know about me, nephew. For example, that I've been gathering information for months about certain irregularities in the company's management since you took control." The veiled threat was clear. Nathan gripped the glass so tightly that for a moment it seemed the crystal would break. "I don't know what you're talking about, but I suggest you watch your words. Remember who controls the majority of the shares. Shares can change hands, Nathan, especially when there's evidence of mismanagement, or worse." With those enigmatic words, Emma ended the call, leaving Nathan with a mixture of rage and concern. Halfway through the journey, the cable car cabin passed near the lookout, where Henry Martinez and the Patriarch waited. The bison, which until then had shown signs of restlessness, suddenly stopped, raised its enormous head, and emitted a deep snort. Its dark eyes seemed fixed on the cabin carrying Ethan. "Easy, friend," murmured Henry, cautiously approaching the animal. But the Patriarch seemed increasingly agitated. It snorted, kicked the ground, and moved its head from side to side. Behaviors that Henry had never observed in the normally serene animal. At that same moment inside the cabin, Ethan felt a slight unusual vibration. Nothing alarming yet, but enough for his senses, sharpened by years of depending on his wheelchair to move, to detect that something wasn't quite right. Instinctively, he checked the safety anchors of his chair. At first glance, everything seemed normal. At the base station, Charlie received the first alert on his parallel monitoring system. A small fluctuation in the tension of the main cable, barely perceptible in the official systems, but clearly visible on his more sensitive sensors. "It's beginning," he murmured to himself while sending an urgent message to Jack, the operator. "Prepare for emergency stop in 3 minutes." Jack, who had been in constant communication with Charlie since the beginning of the journey, immediately went on maximum alert. His hand hovered over the red emergency stop button, ready to press it at the first sign. Near the lookout, the Patriarch began to move erratically. Henry, with decades of experience working with these animals, had never seen anything like it. The enormous bison seemed to be responding to some invisible stimulus, as if it perceived a danger that humans couldn't detect. "What's happening, old friend?" murmured Henry, trying to calm the animal while nervously observing the cabin moving away. At that moment, his radio crackled. It was Charlie. "Dad, how's the Patriarch?" "Very agitated, son. I've never seen him like this. It seems like he senses something." "Stay alert. I think something's about to happen." The cabin continued its ascent, approaching the most critical point of the route. Inside, Ethan noticed that the vibrations were becoming more intense. It wasn't the normal movement of the cable car swayed by the wind, but something more rhythmic, almost as if a piece were progressively loosening. With the experience of someone who has depended on mechanical equipment all his adult life, Ethan immediately recognized the signs of an imminent failure. Without losing his calm, he activated the emergency intercom. "Jack, it's Ethan. There's something strange with the cabin. I feel unusual vibrations." Jack's voice sounded tense. "We're monitoring it, Ethan. Prepare for a possible emergency stop." At that precise moment, a metallic noise, dry and terrifying, echoed inside the cabin. The main support of the anchoring system for the wheelchair had begun to give way. The cabin lurched sharply, dangerously tilting to one side. Ethan, thanks to his trained reflexes, managed to firmly hold onto the sidebars, preventing his chair from sliding toward the door. At the base station, all alarms went off simultaneously. Charlie watched in horror as the parameters shot up on his screen. "Now, Jack, emergency stop." Jack hit the red button with all his strength. The alarms began to sound throughout the station as the system initiated the emergency stop sequence. But something was wrong. The cabin wasn't stopping as it should. "Damn," Charlie murmured. "They've manipulated the emergency system too." In a desperate act, Charlie ran toward the main control panel. He needed a complete system restart, but that required an authorization, code that only Robert Sanders possessed. At the lookout, the Patriarch had reached the limit of its agitation. With a snort that seemed to echo throughout the canyon, the huge bison began to run. Henry, astonished, observed how the animal of more than a ton of weight determinedly headed toward the small construction that housed the external maintenance panel of the cable car's intermediate station. "Charlie, the Patriarch has gone crazy. He's heading straight for the external panel," shouted Henry over the radio as he ran after the bison, knowing it would be impossible to stop it. Inside the cabin, which now oscillated dangerously, Ethan struggled to keep his chair in position. The anchoring had given way almost completely, and only his firm grip on the sidebars prevented the worst. Through the window, he could see the immensity of the canyon below him, a relentless reminder of what was at stake. In a moment of pure instinct, or animal intuition, the Patriarch rammed the external maintenance panel with all its strength. The impact was so violent that the small construction partially gave way, exposing the internal circuits. The bison, as if it knew exactly what it was doing, repeatedly struck the structure with its powerful horns. One of the impacts directly hit the master emergency switch, a mechanical system independent of the electronic ones, designed precisely for cases where the electronic systems failed. With a roar of gears and motors, the cable car system came to a complete stop. The cabin swung violently for a few seconds before becoming motionless, suspended hundreds of meters above the bottom of the canyon. The abrupt stop caused Ethan to be thrown forward, but he managed to hold onto the side supports with all his strength. His wheelchair, now completely free from the sabotaged anchoring, slid dangerously toward the door, stopping just inches from the edge. "Ethan! Ethan! Can you hear me?" Jack's desperate voice sounded choppy over the intercom. "I'm fine," replied Ethan, with labored breathing but a clear mind. The anchoring failed completely, but the cabin stopped in time. "It was the Patriarch," replied Jack with disbelief in his voice. "The damn bison rammed the emergency panel of the intermediate station and activated the mechanical stop. Charlie says the electronic system had been manipulated to ignore the emergency signal." Ethan remained silent for a moment, assimilating what had happened. Then, with surprising calm given the circumstances, he asked, "How long will it take to rescue me?" "We're sending the aerial rescue team. 30 minutes maximum," assured Jack. At the Canyon Lodge, Nathan Morgan received the news of the cable car's technical failure with a mixture of frustration and disbelief. His plan, meticulously elaborated, had been foiled by a bison. The absurdity of the situation contrasted with the gravity of what he had tried to do. His phone rang again. This time it was Robert Sanders, his voice trembling. "Mr. Morgan, we have a problem. The young engineer, Charlie Martinez, has been asking questions. I think he suspects something." "Take care of him," Nathan ordered dryly. "And make sure no one can link the modifications to us." "There's something else," continued Robert, his voice now almost a whisper. "They found evidence of manipulation in the system. Small marks on the screws, fingerprints that shouldn't be there." "Eliminate all the evidence," interrupted Nathan, "and prepare the official story. Mechanical failure due to normal wear and tear." The news of the incident in the cable car spread throughout Pine Valley like wildfire. In less than an hour, a crowd had gathered in the main square, anxious to obtain information about the condition of Ethan Winters, who had become a kind of local hero thanks to his tireless fight for the rights of people with disabilities. The rescue team had managed to reach the suspended cabin and evacuate Ethan without major complications. When the rescue helicopter landed in the town's sports field, a spontaneous ovation erupted among those present. Ethan, visibly moved but physically unharmed except for some minor bruises, greeted the crowd with a serene smile that contrasted with the drama he had just experienced. Laura Harrison was the first to approach, microphone in hand, not only as a journalist but as a concerned friend. "Ethan, how do you feel? What exactly happened up there?" "I'm fine, Laura," replied Ethan, as a paramedic checked his vital signs. "What happened wasn't an accident. The anchoring system for my wheelchair was deliberately manipulated. A murmur of shock ran through the crowd. "Are you sure of what you're saying?" asked Laura, although she already knew the answer. "Completely sure. And I wouldn't have survived if it weren't for a bison." The statement caused confusion among those present, but Henry Martinez, who was making his way through the crowd, nodded solemnly. "The patriarch," confirmed the elderly caretaker. "That old animal rammed the emergency panel just in time." Meanwhile, in the cable car offices, Charlie Martinez worked frantically to collect all the possible evidence before Robert Sanders and his team could eliminate it. He had managed to download the system logs, make copies of the security recordings, and photograph the marks of manipulation on the anchoring mechanism. His heart was beating rapidly, aware that every minute counted. His phone vibrated with a message from Jack. "Sanders is coming your way with 2 technicians. They seem upset." Charlie barely had time to hide a USB drive with all the information when the door opened violently. Robert Sanders entered with his face contorted by a mixture of rage and concern. "Martinez, what the hell are you doing here? This area is restricted during the investigation." "Just securing the systems, Engineer Sanders," replied Charlie with feigned calm. "After an emergency stop, it's standard protocol to verify that there's no damage to the main circuits." Robert observed him with suspicion. "Give me your access card. You're temporarily suspended while the internal investigation is conducted." Charlie handed over his card, aware that this could be the last time he set foot in those offices. Before leaving, he looked directly into Robert's eyes. "It's interesting how precisely the system that you and Mr. Morgan reviewed yesterday failed. Don't you think?" Robert's face visibly paled. "Watch your words, boy. Unfounded accusations can end your career, sir, or something worse." The veiled threat hung in the air as Charlie left the building, the USB drive firmly kept in his pocket. At the Canyon Lodge, Nathan Morgan was holding an improvised press conference showing a perfectly studied face of concern. As owners of the cable car maintenance contract, the Morgan Group deeply regrets the incident that occurred today. "We are fully cooperating with the authorities in the investigation and have decided to temporarily suspend the service to conduct a thorough review of all facilities." The journalists, hungry for details, fired questions from all angles. "Mr. Morgan, how do you respond to Ethan Winters' statements suggesting deliberate sabotage?" Nathan maintained his composure, although a muscle in his jaw visibly tensed. "Mr. Winters' statements are understandable given the trauma he has suffered, but technically unfounded. Our engineers have confirmed that it was a mechanical failure, resulting from normal wear. The system has been operating daily for more than 5 years. Is it true that a bison activated the emergency system?" asked another reporter. Nathan sketched a condescending smile. "That's a picturesque interpretation of the facts. The emergency system activated automatically when it detected the anomaly. Any other version belongs to the realm of local folklore." The conference continued with Nathan skillfully answering each question, projecting an image of control and transparency that dramatically contrasted with his recent actions. What Nathan was unaware of was that, at that precise moment, Emma Richardson was meeting privately with the mayor of Pine Valley and the regional prosecutor in a small room in the municipal building. On the table was a folder with documents that had remained hidden for years. "As you can see, gentlemen," explained Emma with a serene but firm voice, "the Morgan Group has been engaging in questionable practices for more than a decade. Bribes to inspectors, falsification of safety certificates, systematic tax evasion." The mayor, a middle-aged man with a reputation for honesty, reviewed the documents with an expression of growing indignation. "Why do you decide to reveal this to us now, Ms. Richardson? You yourself are part of the Morgan family." Emma remained silent for a moment as if weighing her words. "My brother, Nathan's father, founded this company with solid principles. After his death, I've seen how Nathan has perverted his legacy, transforming a respectable business into a money-making machine without scruples. Today's incident, the attempt against Ethan Winters, was the last straw. We'll need concrete evidence of that attempt," intervened the prosecutor, a cautious and methodical man. Internal documents and testimonies are valuable for other accusations, but to prove an attempt to harm Mr. Winters... The evidence exists, interrupted a voice from the door. It was Charlie Martinez, accompanied by Laura. And it's all here, he added, placing the USB drive on the table. At the local hospital where Ethan had been transferred for a checkup as a protocol, an unexpected visitor appeared at the door of his room. It was Henry Martinez, accompanied by a girl of about 10 years old who carried a drawing in her hands. "May we come in?" asked Henry timidly. "Of course," replied Ethan enthusiastically. "You must be Lily, Henry's granddaughter." The girl nodded, approaching to hand him her drawing. It was a colorful and fanciful representation of the rescue. Ethan in the cable car cabin, and a huge bison with a kind of superhero cape ramming the control panel. "The Guardian Patriarch," read Ethan the title of the drawing, smiling broadly. "It's perfect, Lily. You know, I think that name suits him very well. All the schools are making drawings about the Patriarch," explained the girl proudly. "My teacher says he's a symbol of how nature protects us when we respect it." Henry observed the scene with contained emotion. "I'll never understand how he knew you were in danger," he commented. "The Patriarch was always special, but today it was as if he really understood what was happening." Ethan then remembered the assisted therapy sessions years ago when he himself was still adapting to his new life in a wheelchair. That bison, then a younger but already imposing animal, had shown an unusual sensitivity toward him, always approaching with respect, as if recognizing his internal struggle. "Maybe he did understand, Henry," he finally replied. "There are connections that transcend what we can rationally explain." The conversation was interrupted by Laura's arrival, whose face showed a mixture of excitement and contained triumph. "We have the evidence. Ethan, Charlie managed to collect everything. Recordings, system logs, photographs of the manipulations. It's irrefutable." "And Morgan?" "The prosecutor has issued a preventive detention order. They're on their way to the hotel right now." At the Canyon Lodge, Nathan Morgan was preparing to discreetly leave Pine Valley. His driver had brought the Bentley to the back entrance, and his luggage was already in the trunk. As he closed his briefcase, a decisive knock on the door interrupted his plans. Two state police officers, accompanied by the regional prosecutor, entered without waiting for an invitation. "Nathan Morgan," the prosecutor formally announced, "you are detained by judicial order for investigation for attempted premeditated serious harm, falsification of safety documents, and obstruction of justice." Nathan maintained his composure, although the vein in his temple visibly throbbed. "This is ridiculous. My lawyers will take care of this judicial farce before nightfall." "Your lawyers will have a lot of work, Mr. Morgan," replied the prosecutor, calmly, "especially considering that your chief engineer, Robert Sanders, is already cooperating in exchange for a charge reduction agreement." The blow was evident on Nathan's face. Robert had been his right-hand man for years, the executor of his darkest plans. If he was cooperating, then the damage was incalculable. As the officers escorted him out of the hotel, a small crowd had gathered to witness the scene. Among them, Emma Richardson observed with a mixture of sadness and determination. Their gazes crossed briefly. There was no triumph in Emma's eyes, only the certainty of doing the right thing, however painful it might be. 3 months after the incident, Pine Valley had changed. The small tourist town nestled in the Grand Canyon buzzed with activity, but it wasn't conventional tourism that attracted visitors. The story of the wheelchair-bound activist saved by a bison had captured the imagination of the entire country, becoming a symbol of resistance, connection with nature, and the fight for inclusion. The cable car, temporarily closed after the incident, reopened its doors with a special ceremony. It had not only been completely renovated with the highest safety standards, but now all its cabins were universally accessible. The project, funded with money confiscated from the Morgan Group after a thorough investigation, had become an internationally recognized model of accessibility. Ethan Winters, elegantly dressed for the occasion, cut the inaugural ribbon before an enthusiastic crowd. Beside him were Laura, Charlie, Henry, and surprisingly, Emma Richardson, now interim president of the restructured corporation. Today we celebrate not just the reopening of a cable car, began Ethan in his speech. We celebrate the triumph of truth over greed, of community over individualism, and of justice over impunity. This cable car symbolizes our ability to transform obstacles into opportunities, crises into rebirths. His words were received with enthusiastic applause. Among the crowd, a group of children from the local elementary school held drawings and banners with the stylized image of the Guardian Patriarch, as they now affectionately called the old bison. The animal had become a national celebrity, appearing in television reports and being adopted as an unofficial symbol of multiple awareness campaigns about accessibility and rights of people with disabilities. After the ceremony, while the first visitors enjoyed the renovated cable car, Ethan met with a small group in the newly inaugurated Patriarch Room of the Cultural Center. Emma Richardson, who had gone from minority shareholder to a key piece in the ethical reconstruction of the family business, was the first to speak. I've called you together because I have a proposal I want to share with you before making it public, she began, her voice serene but charged with determination. As you know, the trial against my nephew Nathan continues, and it's only a matter of time before a sentence is handed down. Investigators have uncovered decades of corrupt practices, tax evasion, and systematic bribes. She paused, as if reconciling herself with the harsh reality of what the Morgan name had come to represent. But I haven't gathered you to talk about the past, but about the future. The board of directors has granted me full powers to restructure the company, and I've decided to transform it radically. She unfolded impressive architectural plans on the table. I present to you the project of the comprehensive Center for Accessibility and Rehabilitation of the Grand Canyon, which I propose to build on the grounds of the former Canyon Lodge. Ethan studied the plans with growing excitement. The project was ambitious, a complex that would integrate cutting-edge medical facilities, spaces for research in assistive technologies, adapted accommodation for families during treatments, and extensive green areas designed for outdoor therapies. Emma, this is extraordinary, murmured Ethan, visibly moved. How? The original idea is yours, Ethan, Laura intervened with a smile. Remember that interview 5 years ago, when I asked you what you would do if you had unlimited resources? You described almost exactly this. With a special addition, added Emma, turning to the next page of the plans. The Patriarch Sanctuary, a space where the bison from the reserve, especially our hero, will interact with patients as part of animal-assisted therapy programs. Henry Martinez, who until then had remained silent, nodded in approval. The Patriarch seems to have a special gift for connecting with those who need it most. My father taught me that some animals possess a wisdom that we humans are just beginning to understand. The initial funding is secured, continued Emma. We've established a trust with the assets recovered from Diego's offshore accounts. But I need a director for the project, someone with vision, experience, and above all, heart. Ethan, would you accept that role? The question hung in the air. Ethan looked alternatively at the plans and the expectant faces around him. His mind traveled to the dark days after his diagnosis, when the future seemed like a tunnel with no exit. He remembered how therapy with the Patriarch had been a turning point, returning to him a connection with the world that he thought was lost. I accept, he finally replied, with one condition, that this be a truly community project. I want the inhabitants of Pine Valley to participate in every stage, from design to operation. I expected nothing less from you, Emma smiled. I've already spoken with the mayor about establishing a citizen council that will oversee the entire process. Charlie Martinez, who had been studying the technical aspects of the plans, intervened. We could incorporate renewable energy systems. With the solar exposure we have in the Grand Canyon, we could make the complex practically self-sufficient. And we'll need a solid communication team, added Laura. This story can inspire similar changes throughout the country. I already have contacts in national media interested in documenting the process from the beginning. The meeting continued for hours, with ideas flowing freely as the project came to life in the collective imagination of the group. When they finally concluded, night had fallen. Ethan remained alone in the room, contemplating the plans in the dim light. A sense of peace invaded him, the certainty of being exactly where he should be, doing exactly what he should do. A week later, the entire community of Pine Valley gathered in the main square for the official presentation of the project. The mayor, visibly moved, gave the floor to Ethan, who moved to the adapted podium amid applause. "Friends and neighbors of Pine Valley," he began, his clear and firm voice amplified by the speakers. "Today we begin an extraordinary journey together, a journey that was born from adversity but flourishes in hope, that began with an act of malice but transforms into a monument to human and animal kindness." As Ethan spoke, an unusual movement at the edge of the square caught the attention of those present. Henry Martinez appeared slowly, respectfully guiding the imposing patriarch, adorned with a garland of wildflowers. It was the first time the bison had visited the center of town, an extraordinary event that Henry had meticulously prepared for days. A murmur of amazement ran through the crowd as the majestic animal advanced with slow but sure steps toward the center of the square. The children, initially surprised by the size of the animal, soon began to applaud enthusiastically upon recognizing the hero of their drawings and stories. The patriarch stopped a few meters from the podium where Ethan was speaking. His dark, deep and serene eyes seemed to connect directly with those of the activist. A reverent silence descended over the square as man and animal observed each other in what seemed a mutual recognition that transcended the barriers of species. "This is the patriarch," continued Ethan, without breaking the visual connection with the bison. "Many call him a hero, but I prefer to see him as a teacher. He taught us that true strength is not in power over others, but in the ability to protect the vulnerable. He reminded us that we are part of something greater than ourselves, an interconnected web of life, where each being has value and purpose." Ethan paused, observing how the patriarch, slightly inclined, as if nodding to his words. "The center we will build will carry his name and his spirit. It will be a place where no one will be judged by their limitations, but celebrated for their abilities, where the most advanced technology will combine with the ancestral wisdom of our connection with nature." Emma Richardson went up to the podium next to Ethan and unfolded a huge architectural plan for everyone to see. "The first stone will be laid next month," she announced, "and we hope that in 18 months we can inaugurate the first phase of the complex. But this is not a corporate project imposed from above. It's a community dream that we will build together, brick by brick, idea by idea." While the ceremony continued with the detailed presentation of the project, Nathan Morgan watched the news on the small television in his preventive cell in Phoenix. His face, once arrogant, now showed the traces of stress and defeat. The news program showed live images of the celebration in Pine Valley, focusing alternately on Ethan, Emma, and the imposing patriarch. "Today we witness not only the announcement of a new medical center," commented the presenter, "but perhaps the birth of a new model of socially responsible business." Emma Richardson, now at the head of the Morgan Group, has declared that the entire corporation will be restructured following principles of universal accessibility, environmental sustainability, and community benefit. Nathan turned off the television with an abrupt gesture. He didn't need to see how his aunt dismantled his empire and transformed it into something unrecognizable to him. His lawyers had explained to him that morning that, given the abundance of evidence and testimonies, his best option was to negotiate a guilty plea that could significantly reduce his sentence. 6 months later, the Comprehensive Center for Accessibility and Rehabilitation began to take shape. The imposing structures of steel and glass rose where the Canyon Lodge once stood, harmoniously integrating with the natural landscape of the Grand Canyon. Ethan personally supervised every aspect of the project, from the exact slope of the access ramps to the tactile materials for people with visual disabilities. The Patriarch Sanctuary, an innovative facility where bison could interact with patients in a safe but natural environment, was his favorite project. One afternoon, while reviewing the progress with Charlie, now Director of Sustainability for the project, Laura approached, running with a tablet in hand. "Ethan, Charlie, you won't believe this," she exclaimed, her face radiant with excitement. "The center has been selected as a finalist for the International Award for Accessible Architecture. And it's not even finished yet." Charlie smiled broadly. "I'm not surprised. What we're building here doesn't exist anywhere else in the world." "It's not just the building," added Ethan, with the wisdom that characterized his reflections. "It's the philosophy behind it. We're demonstrating that true accessibility is not just about ramps and elevators, but about creating spaces where all people, regardless of their abilities, can develop their full potential." As they talked, a familiar figure appeared on the horizon. Henry Martinez approached slowly, accompanied as always by the patriarch. The old bison, who now rarely separated from Henry, had become a habitual presence at the center's construction site. The workers, initially nervous about the presence of the huge animal, now saw it as a kind of collective mascot, a silent guardian of the project. "I bring news," announced Henry with an enigmatic smile. "The patriarch will be a father. The youngest bison in the reserve is expecting his calf. The veterinarians confirm that he is the father." The news, apparently simple, acquired an almost mythical significance for the small group. It was as if the cycle completed itself, as if life affirmed its continuity even after so much drama and transformation. "I propose that the first calf born be designated as the official symbol of the center," suggested Laura, always thinking of the communicational aspect. "A new generation of guardians for a new era in Pine Valley." At sunset, when the workers retired and the construction site fell silent, Ethan remained alone on what would be the main terrace of the center. From there, the view of the Grand Canyon was as impressive as from the cable car, but with the comforting solidity of the earth beneath his wheels. The setting sun tinted the rock formations in golden and copper tones, creating a spectacle that never ceased to move him. He thought about the long road traveled, the obstacles overcome, the alliances forged. He thought about Nathan Morgan, who had finally accepted a plea deal and now faced years of confinement. He felt no hatred or desire for revenge, only the certainty that justice, in its way, had prevailed. He thought about Emma Richardson, who had demonstrated that corporate power could be redirected toward the common good when there was the will. He thought about Charlie and Laura, young idealists who now had the opportunity to build something transcendent. And he thought about the patriarch, that majestic animal whose instinct or intuition or whatever it was had changed the course of so many lives, including his own. As if responding to his thoughts, a familiar snort sounded behind him. The patriarch approached slowly, without Henry this time, as if it had decided to make a visit of its own will. Ethan smiled, extending his hand toward the imposing animal. The bison approached with that characteristic dignity and allowed Ethan to caress its furry forehead. "Thank you, old friend," murmured Ethan, "for reminding us that we are stronger when we take care of each other." The sun finished hiding behind the mountains, and the first stars began to shine in the sky. One page closed, but a new chapter, brighter and more hopeful, began to be written in the Grand Canyon. And at the center of that story were a man in a wheelchair, a wise bison, and a shared dream of a more accessible world for all. The next day, when the workers returned to the site, they found something extraordinary: a perfect bison footprint, imprinted in the fresh cement of what would be the main entrance to the center. No one had seen the animal approach that area, but there was its mark, like a signature, like a seal of approval. By unanimous decision, that footprint was preserved, protected by a tempered glass cover, becoming the first official monument of the Comprehensive Center for Accessibility and Rehabilitation, the Patriarch. A permanent reminder that sometimes the most unlikely heroes are the ones who leave the deepest mark. Dear listeners, we hope that this story of overcoming and connection between Ethan Winters and the Patriarch has deeply moved you. The Grand Canyon of Arizona not only serves as the setting for this touching narrative, but also reminds us of the natural beauty of America and the strength of its people. To continue this emotional journey, we have prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories set in different corners of America, where human determination and connection with our cultural roots intertwine in surprising ways. Find it here by clicking to your left. If you like this story of the Guardian, Bison, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give the video a like. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life, personal growth, and the deep bonds that unite us as a community. What would you have done in Ethan's place? Do you believe that special connections exist between humans and animals like the one we saw with the patriarch? We look forward to your comments to continue this conversation, which, like the center in our story, is just beginning to be built.